This makes a change. I've actually got it right.
I knew you were a tech wizard.
Now, let me see. I'm going to turn you around. And let me see. So, there we go. I'll sit at that end of the table, mate, so you can see what's going on. I've got this little mic thing.
No.
Can you hear that? Can you hear that, mate?
I can hear you clear.
Okay. I wonder, am I coming through this or? Oh, hang on. No, it's not. I'm not, am I? Connect. I want to do. Here we go. All right. Let me see. Am I clearer now than I was?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just trying this little thing, gizmo thing here, which hopefully will come up with better sound than we did last time. I don't know.
No problem.
You said you could hear okay last time, didn't you?
Yeah, I could, yeah.
No. All right. Now, just waiting for Tracy to turn up as well. She did say she would.
Is that Tracy online, is it?
Tracy Glendenning, yeah.
Okay.
All good.
It's too bad. Shall we put them in here?
Oh, yeah, it's great.
We'll pass it down to David.
Now, am I on here? That's what I want to know. Yes, I am.
How are the kids going?
This is on here.
What was that?
Get some reasons ahead of it.
Yeah.
She's doing very well.
Girls at basketball practice.
How's it going with year 12?
Oh, that's all right.
Wow.
Nick,
It's pretty right.
let's see.
12 years old again.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, Brad, mate, did you get the handout?
Yes, I printed that out at work today. So, yep, I've got a copy in front of me.
Fabulous. Good.
Thank you for that.
That's all right. Now, it might just take us a minute or two to get going.
No worries.
We've just got home not long ago, so give us a few tips.
No, that's fine.
I was going to say, I was feeling a bit left out here.
All right, it's all good. So I'll introduce you. You remember Manon from last time?
Hi.
Hello there.
And Pam is here as well.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
She's my wife. She's met my other half.
I've seen some of Pam's messages on Facebook, I think, through.
Okay.
All good, though. All good. Hello, nice to meet you.
All right. And that's Jason here, Brad.
Hi, how you going?
Good.
Now we're one down here because Elise is not particularly well, apparently.
Oh, it's not good to hear.
When we're done. Right.
I'll just come and change this for you. I have to think for it.
YouTube's awesome.
I guess I'd have to see what your edition is like, because I don't know how recommended it away. Yeah, I'm just, there's one in the phone, and that's where it's. I'm pretty sure it's fast enough to keep it, so that you can see under. I think you're knitting and then you're knitting and you're knitting and you're so it just ends up as a garden stitch. That's how garden stitch is.
Yeah, I think that's right. So one side looks like knit, and then so you get lumpy bits on one side. Yeah. So
Lovely bits on both sides.
yeah, so you knit, 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 knit. Yeah, yeah. So to make it flat like that.
Mine looks the same on both sides.
Yes,
that's how
yeah.
you're knitting and knitting.
Yeah. So what happens is when you knit.
Very close to finish it.
So you can do it.
So if you grab,
Oh, no, it's not. It's not. Oh, let me bring it up next week.
Yeah.
you get the bobbly bit on the back. So you've got to, and pearl. You've got to pearl it a slightly different stitch, and it makes it flat. My mum would always say, and you knit into the back of the stitch. I was like, I don't know what that means.
Knitting like this.
Okay.
Upside down in the front.
Well, welcome to tonight. We are going to do, I called it the story of the Bible, and really tonight is about finding the way around the Bible. That's an easy way to do it. I don't know whether anybody had a chance to think about a passage from the Bible that you'd like to look at over the course of the session.
You said to find one, so I think.
Found one.
I found one that I was interested in. The parable of the prodigal son. Prodigal and his brother. The parable of the prodigal and his brother.
Okay. Very good. How did you find it? Just out of interest.
Just ask my mother.
Fair enough. That's fine.
That's a good one.
Now I
You
know
didn't
Brad.
spend 20 hours in reading the Bible.
No,
No, that's fine. Do you know where it is?
it's kind of around this place, maybe.
Okay. Have you got a reference for it? So you.
I don't.
You don't?
But it's in the New Testament. I think it's the book of.
Okay. We'll work on that one. That's all good. Brad, I think you've got something for us, haven't you? You're going to work on.
Yeah, mine was the actual passage was James 2:14, and it was about faith and works.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I found that interesting. And then as you do a bit more of an internet search or do a bit more research, you realise how political one passage can be. And
you're kind of breaking up there, unfortunately. We've got some of that, but not all of it.
okay, no worries.
Anyway, you're doing James, so that's good. I'm glad you found something. That's good. Jason, do you have one?
I like the story of sowing the seed.
Okay. All right. And do you know where it is? No? Okay. That's all good.
The other favourite one I have is the Sermon on the Mount.
Okay. Yeah. There's lots in there. So it's huge.
Well, let's just do seeds.
Okay. Judy, did you have one more?
Yeah, I have a trick one. I can take, go with loaves and fishes.
Okay. All right, good. So we've got some idea. And Pam, you wouldn't have a clue because you weren't here. So we just basically picked a Bible passage that we'd like to look at over the course of the 4 weeks. So.
He thinks he's got enough. I think he's cutting it off.
Well, no, this
I'm
is-
sure she can
This
pick
is
the one.
for
Yeah, he's giving
you
me
to
the out.
pick so you get the most out of it. So we'll work on it. Okay.
What would you look that one up? Mine's sewing. I'm looking up sewing or guess seed. Not coming up.
It's quite interesting actually. That's the one that Lisa's got for Sunday school on Sunday. Most of us sitting over there. It's Matthew 13 touchdown. All right.
Okay. What would you look that one up? Mine's sewing. I'm looking up sewing or guess seed.
Ooh. What I'm going to do is get you just to get your Bible. Okay.
Chapter what?
13. But anyway, I want you to get your Bible. And what we're going to do, sorry, Matthew chapter 13.
So,
This is just a way of referencing how we get
so
it.
with these numbers, they're the chapters. So we're looking. The book is what you see at the top of the page. Yeah, and then Matthew.
Now, what I'll get you to do is open your Bible up like this. Right, so you've got one cover down here and one cover down there. All right. Now, you might find that there's stuff at the beginning. For example, my Bible has a table of contents, and it also has a preface. But I want you to get past that stuff and find the first page of the book of Genesis, which is the very first section of the Bible. So keep going until you find something that says Genesis at the top of the page. Got it? Yeah. Then go to the back, and I want you to find the end of the book of Revelation. Now, again, there might be stuff at the back. You might have maps or something, but you might not. Mine doesn't. It looks like yours doesn't. Right, so you've got this. Right? What we're going to do is we're going to play with dividing this up into halves and quarters and thirds as a way of finding your way around your Bible. Okay? Now, just on the handout I'll show you, there's the front page, which we're going to ignore. On the second page, I've given you a blank page. That one. It's called page because we've got nothing on it. All right. So, if you can do, I'm going to just draw a line down the side.
Is it the paperwork we gave us last week?
No, this is the paperwork I've given you this week, and here is your copy. Sorry. Let's open it up for you. Oh yes, sorry, I do have pens. No extra charge. Pens. Okay. So, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I did. Got that mail because I was just sitting around with something to do. So, I've just drawn a line down the side of the page. Okay, yes, so don't need to do that. But, so the very first thing, the first book is called Genesis. So if you go to the top of that line and write Genesis at the top. And then the last book of the Bible is called Revelation. So go right down to the bottom of the line and write Revelation. Okay, so now, so you've got that. Can't see it, Brad, I'm sorry, but hopefully you've got the idea. So let's say we now divide that line in half. So go and make a mark in the middle. Okay, and I'm even going to put half next to it so I know. You might like that.
And I'm only reading, so I'm gonna. No good at that.
So, and that's going to represent halfway through those pages. So, take your Bible and split your pages into approximately 2 halves. And open up in the middle. Where are you? And hopefully everybody gets the same answer.
Psalm 105, is that how you pronounce it?
Psalm.
It
Yes,
is
Psalm.
Psalm, that is correct. Right. Psalms.
Psalms.
Psalms. All right, so in the middle, write Psalms. Okay. So, And pretty universally, whatever Bible you go to, if you do that, exactly what we've done, you're going to end up with Psalms in the middle. And indeed, Psalms is the book that is it right in bang in the middle of the Bible.
Excluding the index and anything else.
Absolutely. If you have a, like I showed you last time, I showed you what was it called, a study Bible, which had a whole pile of stuff on the back. So if you included that pile of stuff, obviously your estimation is going to be slightly off because there were so many pages in the back. So find the end of the Bible and the beginning of the Bible itself, and you'll find halfway through is the Psalms. Okay, so let's now do it for quarters. So you've got your half, right? And let's see how we go with quarters. So take the first half and split it in half again and see where, I'm not quite sure what will happen here, so let's see. So my quarter from the beginning, I'm in 1 Samuel.
Yeah, 2 Samuel.
You're in 2 Samuel.
I'm in 23. Oh, no,
You're in
2
2
Samuel.
I'm in 1
Samuel.
Samuel
1
as well.
Samuel.
Towards the end, though.
So this proves we're good at halving.
Brad, where are you, mate? Have you found that?
Yeah, I'm in 1 Samuel as well, but mine was a little bit harder because mine's got the Apocrypha in the middle. So I had to sort of misjudge it, sort of. So,
Yeah. But still, you've landed in Samuel like everybody else, so that's good. So we're either in 1 or 2 Samuel. All right. Yeah, write it down. Samuel 1 or 2, whichever. That's fine.
You just write Samuel, or is it really long so you can't?
It's divided into two books, 2 sections. Okay, so let's do the same thing with the second half. So we're going to go 3 quarters. So take your Psalms in the second half, and I'm going to end up. So that was the second half. So take your Psalm. No. Okay, so start from the Psalms, the back half of the whole Bible.
Yes, the middle, yeah, the middle.
So
So
you've
start
just
back
done
in the
one
middle and then
quarter.
go towards the
Go
back.
to the middle,
Oh, okay.
yeah, and see where you're at.
Woo! I got Matthew.
I got Matthew too. Okay. Amos. Now you'll find, both of you, if you flick a few pages further on, you won't be too far from Matthew. There it is.
And then,
Quite a few
yeah,
pages.
there's the New Testament.
Where are you? Manage Matthew?
Oh, the New Testament's very small.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, that's all.
Brad, how did you go?
yeah, I'm in Matthew as well, which sounds like it's good news.
Oh.
So look,
Do you
we
get the
could.
joke there?
There's a Bible called the Good News.
There's the
Oh,
Good
the
Bible.
Bible.
famous Good News Bible, because it comes from an old term like this is all
And
good
the other
news.
thing is, it's the Gospel of Matthew, and the word gospel means good news as well. So it's 2 parts. Now, you could see, we could keep dividing the Bible into bits like that as a way of finding our way around.
We could.
You can do that as well. The other thing I thought,
Like
I'd
what?
flick through.
My mum had to memorize the books of the New Testament in particular when she was younger. My mum too.
I got to start with Matthew, Mark,
My
Luke,
mum
and
just
John.
did a list of, as well
Yeah.
today. She was like quoting it.
So, yeah, you could. So, if I ended up with Matthew and with Revelation as my last quarter, I could divide that in half again and go with 8. And I end up in Acts, for example. John. Now, those 2 books, Acts and John, are right next to each other.
I got right.
Romans.
Yeah, I got right.
Romans is the other side of Acts from John. So those 3, John, Acts, Romans, are all in a row.
John should be the one.
So
It's definitely.
it's just a sort of an easy way, if you can remember those books, Genesis at the start, you've got Psalms right in the middle, You've got Samuel's a quarter of the way through.
We could do this
Matthew's
mathematically if you really want to.
three-quarters of the way through. Revelation's at the end. It's just an easy way to find your way through the Bible. Of course, you then got to work out where all the other books are in relation to those books, which is what I'll show you in a minute. Okay. So we've ended up with a line, and I've marked quarter, half, three quarters in the end, and I've got the books Genesis, Samuel, Psalms, Matthew, Revelation on my line. Okay. Now I want you to go over to the next page, this one. Now this, I just let you know, I found this graphic in this book here, which is what the Bible is all about for young explorers. I've had it on my shelf for goodness knows how long, 20 years or something. And it's good because it's easy to read, lots of pictures, and it's basically, in a way, it's a Bible in a cartoon form.
Or is it good for you or people like?
So, well, I mean, it'd be good for a 10-year-old, really. So you've got, there's Psalm 23, the Shepherd's Psalm, and they've got some of the words, but also it's in like cartoon form as well. So it's really good to
You can get the Manga Bible if you like manga.
There's many Bibles.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that has this little picture in it. So what you've got there is a bookshelf, and the bookshelf represents the Bible as a whole. Okay? And it explains what the Bible is. So it says it's a library of smaller books, and that indeed is what the Bible is. So Genesis, those names that we've written down on our line, Bible line, are all books in their own right. Now, if you went to a Jewish synagogue, with the first books that we've noted, you would find that they have in their collection a whole pile of scrolls, and each book is an individual scroll. Right? Yeah, in the synagogue. So they don't have a book like we do. They have it all written on scrolls.
Really?
Yes.
Still?
Yes, still, because that's the way they've always done it. They have it written on scrolls. Like tradition. Yeah. So the book of Genesis will be a scroll, and the next book, Exodus, will be a scroll. And so the Bible really is just a collection of all of those scrolls. Okay? The New Testament is different because the Jews don't use the New Testament, so the first part of the Old Testament is. So if you look at this little bookshelf graphic, you've got there a little, what looks like a book, and there's 5 books together to start off with, which is headed there, the law. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Those are the first 5 books, the first 5 scrolls that we find in the Bible. Those are the names. Okay? So they've given them all in order, and they've given them a kind of a category, an overall category. So the first 5 books are what are known as the law. The next books are history. Okay? So they are stories of the children of Israel, the people of the Jews, okay, through a certain section of their history. That's really what those books are. Now you'll notice that there's a couple of books there. We found one of them on our timeline. 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles. Now I think the reason why they're 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 is those books would be so long they fit on 2 scrolls. Right? That's why I think they're split into 2 each. Because they're long books.
What about the Psalms though?
The Psalms is a pretty long book. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's all one scroll. Anyway, so law, history, that's the first part of the Bible. Then there's poetry, and you'll find that there's Job, that is pronounced, not Job. I always thought it was Job, but it's not, it's Job. And Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon. Those are books of poetry, and there you'll find Psalms. Now that's kind of interesting because Psalms, if you remember, was halfway through.
Yeah.
So we've only got to the second shelf of this collection, and we're halfway through already.
New Testament's so short, but it's after the bookshelf.
Got a lot of books in it.
Mm.
Okay, so they're relatively short books, you see. Then we have what are called the major prophets: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, and then the minor prophets, of which there are 12. Now, the reason for the major and the minor is quite simple. Isaiah is a scroll all to itself. Jeremiah is a scroll all to itself. Lamentations is an exception. Ezekiel and Daniel are scrolls to themselves. But the minor prophets, that group on the third bookshelf, actually all fit together on one scroll. Okay? And they're called the minor prophets because they're short. That's all it is.
So all these stories still kind of have some sort of moral advice, for example.
There's a big variety as to what they include. Well, let's explore that a little later on tonight. If that's all right, I'll just put that one on hold for a moment.
No worries.
So we've got our major prophets and our minor prophets, and that's the end of what we call the Old Testament. Then the first book of the New Testament is Matthew, which for us was, as you've noted, 3/4 of the way through the whole collection. Well, you guys ended up in the minor prophets, didn't you? But not very far from where Matthew actually is. So the last quarter of the Bible is the New Testament. Now it contains, first of all, the Gospels. 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. They are the stories of the life of Jesus. 4 different accounts of Jesus' life. Then there is the book of Acts, which they've given its own category of history. Now, really what the book of Acts is the very early days of the Christian church. Okay? So after Jesus' crucifixion, the first couple of decades.
Is it all by Paul or just some of it?
Acts? No, it's not by Paul.
Not by Paul at all.
Not at all. The book of Acts, they think, is written by the author of the book of Luke, because both of them share a prologue, a preface, right at the very beginning, and it's addressed to the same person. But it does look as one text, so it's written by the same person. But not, it's about Paul, but it's not by him. It's about Paul and Peter and all the apostles and what they do. So then, the Gospels and history, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John and Acts. The next shelf down are letters. So there's letters by Paul, okay, is the next shelf. So Paul wrote a lot of letters. Okay. Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians. Now they're not on scrolls, they're just, here's my first letter and there's my second letter. They're 2 different letters written at different times. Then you've got Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians.
So they're all Paul's?
They're all by Paul. Now, why are they called Romans, Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Thessalonians?
Because that's who he's writing to.
Yeah, and who are
They're people like
They're a church.
church groups in certain areas.
they? They're in cities,
Oh,
in actual fact. Okay? So the Romans are people who lived in Rome.
Corinth.
Corinthians lived in Corinth. See, they're all cities. So they're churches in cities. Okay, that's why. Galatians, Galatia, Ephesians, Ephesus, which is the only place in the Bible I've actually been to. So Ephesus is in modern-day Turkey. Okay. It used to be a seaport, but it is now inland, slightly inland. It is still called Ephesus. It's actually a ruin these days. It's not lived in at all. But it has a rather large and impressive amphitheatre, which was used until quite recently. So, for example, the pop star Sting, did a concert in the amphitheatre at Ephesus.
Oh, Cool.
You don't remember that?
No.
He told us on a tour
Oh, there
when we
you
did the tour of it. So, but they
Well,
Well,
use it
recently they've
because
they don't
tweaked
use it
it.
anymore because it's an archaeological site, you see, and I think they decided it was getting damaged.
Mm.
With all these people, pop things trooping through, you can just imagine.
Yeah.
And what happened to the coast?
Yeah, there seems to have been some movement in the sea. Yeah. How you doing there, Brad? I can hear a bit of noise.
Sorry, I was just moving around, but I'm taking it all in.
So letters to churches, and then the second group on the same shelf is letters to individuals. Okay, again by Paul. 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, and Philemon. Philemon's quite an interesting one. I should mention that. So Philemon was a rich man who owned a number of slaves, and one of his slaves escaped, found Paul, and converted to Christianity. Philemon was a Christian, so Paul wrote to Philemon and said, here's your slave back, but look after him. See? Don't punish him for running off, because he's found Christianity by doing it. So that's quite an interesting little book, that one.
Oh, then written by the slave owner.
No, it's written by Paul to the slave owner.
Oh.
Yeah,
Sent
and the
him
slave
back,
had to
see?
take him.
The
take
slave
him.
had to take the letter back to his master, having escaped.
Good. Paul did a good job of him.
Who's Paul?
So Paul is Paul was one of the followers of Jesus who he converted to Christianity sort of in the early days of the church, just after Jesus had been executed. And he became instrumental, highly instrumental actually, in the formation of the Christian church. He was originally a Jew, so he was one of the people.
He was a
who
persecutor.
He was absolutely fundamentally against the early Christian church, but he had quite a spectacular spiritual experience which convinced him to change sides, to become a Christian. And then he then spent the rest of his life travelling around the Mediterranean and making converts to Christianity, setting up a number of these churches that he's written these letters to were churches that he set up. So he's gone to a town like Rome, he set up these churches, and then he's gone off somewhere else, and then he's written back to them because he's heard there's problems or there's all sorts of things.
Incredibly charismatic.
Yes, absolutely. So he was very, very important to the formation of the Christian church.
He was a bit cranky.
He wasn't
When you read
very-
something, it's cranky man.
Yeah, but that was the nature of him. That was why it was so important. Now, then bottom row of books, general letters: Hebrews, James, 1 Peter, 2 Peter, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, and Jude. Now these letters are organised a bit differently. Hebrews was originally thought to be by Paul, but is now in question. It doesn't have his style of writing. There's a number of question marks over it. Okay. So some people will say, oh yes, it's by Paul and it has to be by Paul and so on. But others will say, no, it's not, for various reasons. And they've analysed the text and that sort of.
Do they have another author they think it may be if it's not Paul?
No, I don't think there is. I don't think there is. There may be various people who have, various theories, but I don't think there's a settled, agreed theory if it's not Paul that's written it.
Okay.
So I can't give you much enlightenment there, I'm afraid. Now, the other letters, James, Peter, John, Jude, these are named after the people who wrote them. Okay, so they're not by Paul at all, and they're not to James, to Peter, or to John. They are by James, by Peter, by John, and by Jude. Okay, so they're quite different from
So
these
1,
other
2, and
ones.
3 by the same John.
The same John,
Okay.
the Apostle John, as in the disciple John, who appears in the Gospels.
Ah,
So all these books are by the people, for the Hebrews.
Why do we not spend more time on those? We spend more time on the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, just quotes from Jesus, but not
Yes.
but written when?
It varies. So we think that the Gospels were probably all written within the first 100 years after Jesus' death.
But how would they know to quote him directly if it was written 100 years later?
Within, not as late as 100
Oh,
years. So the first Gospel to be written, so we're looking at this little group here. The first Gospel to be written, we think, is the Gospel of Mark. And then we think Matthew and Luke have developed kind of alongside of each other, but using Mark as a kind of a source text. So we think Mark was the original, Mark was the earliest gospel. We think Mark indeed may have been a companion of Paul's, on Paul's journeys. So the Gospels are the stories of Jesus' life. Now, Mark would have done that. He would have written his book by interviewing the people who saw Jesus and who heard what he said and remember the events. That's what they think. They think Matthew and Luke also did the same thing, but they had access to other sources that Mark didn't have access to for whatever reason. Now, if you look at the three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they are very similar in this order and format of the stories. Okay? There's very little difference between them other than Matthew is considerably longer than Mark and has extra stories in there to fill it out a bit. Luke, again, has extra stories to fill out the Gospel.
Which are not the same as Matthew.
In some cases they are, in some cases they aren't.
So they may have been designed for different people, just 100 miles away.
Yes, that's right.
And then at some point they all pulled them together.
So the same story is just written from different perspectives.
Yes. Sometimes the same perspective is the same person who's related it. If it's gone through Mark, for example, might be written to a different person, for example. We know, for example, the Gospel of Luke has actually it's addressed to someone called Theophilus. Whereas Matthew's not addressed to someone. The Gospel of John is the last one to be written, we think. Now, John, it's disputed exactly what's gone on there, but the theory is that it was being written by someone who's listening to the disciple John. And it's the disciple John who's telling the story and kind of dictating it.
A very, very early book.
It's later than Matthew, Mark, and
So these guys are in their 20s and 30s following Jesus?
yeah, John
So
was
they could
reckoned,
be 30 years later
Yeah.
after he died.
John was reckoned to be the youngest of the disciples, and he's reckoned to be a very old man when he dictates this book. So
The students of Jesus?
yes,
Yes,
yes, that's a good
They
way of
follow
putting it.
Jesus.
Yeah.
And they're in many of these stories.
So Jesus began his teaching career, and he's selected a group of men, 12, to follow him and to then spread the word. And John, he's thought to be the youngest of the disciples, and he's also thought to be the only one who was not executed for being a disciple. He may have been the only one who died of natural causes.
So is there like historical evidence for the others being outside of the Bible?
For the historical evidence.
Well, how do we know that happened?
Church tradition, probably. There may well be some evidence of people like Paul and Peter. We're pretty sure that Peter was crucified also, like Jesus. So I don't know whether you know Jesus was crucified on a cross. Peter, when he was crucified, actually said he didn't want to be crucified like Jesus was because he was not worthy. He actually elected to be crucified upside down.
But there's a reference to that somewhere in the Bible, isn't it? They said, and this indicated a way that he was going to die.
Yes.
I can't read. There's a place.
Yes,
Yes, there's somewhere.
Right at the end of John's Gospel, there's a conversation between Peter and Jesus. It doesn't tell you how Peter dies.
But
It just
it makes
tells-
some reference.
It does tell you that he is going to be executed. So, that's a handy little chart. Find your way around the Bible. Especially if you think about you add it to this, what you've done with your line. So, 3/4 of the way through, approximately, is the beginning of the New Testament, which is all of that. So, if you're looking for a book in the New Testament, you're looking for something that is in the last quarter of your Bible. Okay. Any other questions on that? Brad, you too, mate. Any questions?
No, not at this stage.
Okay. So, let's go on. Next 2 pages. So again, look, I've taken these 2 charts from what the Bible is all about young explorers, because I think this is quite useful. This is a different way of presenting things. Now we're going to go to the Old Testament events first, okay, seeing as the Old Testament is the first part of the Bible. So the next page, page 4. And what you've got there is an attempt to give a timeline of the Bible. So the first book is Genesis, because Genesis has things like the creation story, how the world was made is in Genesis. And it shows you approximately how many years, and it's quite a bit of time, that the book of Genesis covers. Then you have Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 1 Kings, and so on. And you'll find that list of books is pretty much the same, in the same order as your bookshelf picture over here. Pretty much in the same order. Then you've got these other books that are off to the side, they're trying to sort of put in where they figure these fit into the overall story of the Bible. Okay, so they've put the book of Job quite early on. They're suggesting that Job was written at a time with Genesis, early on in the Bible story. There's a cluster.
Job is still in the Old Testament.
In the Old Testament, that's right. Yeah. And there's a cluster around 2 Samuel, 1 Chronicles, Psalms, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon's, Proverbs. Okay,
So this is all the Old Testament on this page.
that's the Old Testament story of the Old Testament. Now, what's missing from there, I should just let you know, is the prophecy books. In fact, there's a little box to the side down here, and it says, the books of prophecy tell about events during the divided kingdom, exile and return to Jerusalem. See the chart on the page. So all of the books that are labelled, let me see if I can find them, the major prophets and the minor prophets are excluded from this chart because they're actually not really trying to tell a history. They're trying to prophesy events, or they're trying to provide commentary on what's going on at the time. So they don't really give you any insight into the story of the Old Testament. Okay. Let me just very briefly summarize this, what you've got here. I'm going to just follow down this line. So at the beginning, we've got the creation story. And then there's a variety of other stories after the creation story. Little stories, things like Noah's Ark. You know the story of Noah's Ark, the story of the flood, is in Genesis as well. But the main purpose of Genesis, really, from certainly a Jewish point of view, is to tell the story of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Those 4 men are called the patriarchs. They are, as it says on the side here, founders of the Jewish nation. Okay. So Abraham is like the great-grandfather of all the Jews, and then his son Isaac, then his son Jacob, And then Jacob had 12 sons, one of whom is Joseph, and Joseph plays the major part in the last section of Genesis. So that's really what Genesis is all about. It's about those 4 characters and the beginning, early beginnings of the Jewish people.
Abraham's a great grandfather of Islam as well.
Yes. Also. So,
Which is interesting.
so
Is that in another book?
The same.
Islam is the Muslims.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Isaac had a half brother called Esau. And Isaac and Esau, Isaac became the father of the Jewish nation. Esau became the father, or Muslims tend to claim Esau as being their father. Okay? Both came from Abraham. So Judaism, Christianity, which has come out of Judaism, and then Islam, through Abrahamic faiths. They're all related to each other. Yeah. And you'll find if you look in the Quran, which is the Islamic holy book, you'll find a lot of stories in there which are very, very similar to a lot of the stories in the Bible. So Joseph, when we get down to Joseph ended up in Egypt. And then we have a period of a couple of hundred years, we think, after the end of Joseph's life, where the children of Israel were in Egypt and basically they became slaves to the Egyptians. And they wanted out, obviously. And they are rescued by a man called Moses. And his name is written down there. Now, the story of Moses is told in the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and also Deuteronomy. Okay. So those 4 are the next 4 books of the Bible. And so Moses' job was to take the Jews out of Egypt and lead them back to their homeland, the promised land they called it, which is Canaan, or Palestine, or modern-day Israel. And there's a great deal of wilderness wanderings going on there. There's also a lot of laws and all sorts of things. But it's basically the story of Moses and the journey of the children of Israel back home.
That's where Moses was given the 10 Commandments.
The 10 Commandments, yes, that's correct. So that's in the book of Exodus. Okay. But you will find in Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy also, there are a lot of laws. So if you remember on the bookshelf, those first 5 books we call the law. And it's because those contain a lot of laws. And if you are a Jew, you follow those laws religiously. Okay? So there's dietary laws, there's all sorts of things, cleanliness and how you worship, and just a lot of stuff.
It's the part where
Yeah, it's interesting that that period of time, I'm not sure that people really had a sense of a life after death. But there were certainly strict rules around those. So if you broke some of these laws, you would be outcast. See? So you'd be like, you might be in the middle of the desert and say, right, well, off you go. You can look after yourself then. And that, which is not very good.
But I get the impression it's more about cleanliness and hygiene and
so it's basically
keeping.
just being able to live.
Yeah, and keeping,
Together
like
and
it's about skin diseases as well. If they separate the people with skin diseases that they say they're not necessarily leprosy, and they have these rules about if there's mold in a house and then it's in clothes and in like they go into.
There's a lot of wisdom that
really
they knew
like this
that
detail.
it didn't make sense, but now and later on, it seems that the Jewish people turn that into God's holiness. And that you must follow it, otherwise
I mean, there's a variety of punishments. So there's the less severe ones. I mean, for example, so you're talking about cleanliness. A woman, when she goes through her period, she's unclean.
Yeah.
She's designated unclean. Now, every woman goes through that. Right? But it's not as though she's sinned, it's just she's called unclean. So she has a period of 2 weeks, for example, where she can't have sex with her husband. So there's this cyclic thing. There are some times where there are some sins that people do, which you then go and make an offering, a sin offering at the temple, which will absolve you of that problem. And then there are others where you're outcast, and there are some where you're stoned, where you're executed. So there's a variety of levels of sin within that law that the Jews follow. Now these days, I think they follow it a very different way from the way they used to.
It's interesting that the Jews gave up stoning, but the Muslims didn't.
No, not yet. Islam's a much younger faith. Really, much younger faith than Judaism. It's much younger than Christianity, actually, as well. Yeah, because so what happened in Islam? Their prophet is called Muhammad, and Muhammad believed that he was given the Quran by one of the angels. Gabriel appeared to him and dictated the Quran to him. That happened after Christianity was formed. So I think it was around 500.
Yeah.
So it's quite a long time after Christianity.
Christianity was formed.
2,000 years ago.
Yeah. But then you see what Muhammad has done with this link with Abraham is he's traced his people back to Abraham. So, and the people that the Quran was written for are those people who find their origins back from Abraham. So it's the same region of the world. So yes, it's a much younger faith in terms of the Quran was written, say, around 500 years after Christianity.
There you have it. I thought it
So-
was as old as
No, it's not.
Judaism.
No.
Well,
The thing about they claim Jesus as one of their prophets.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
They would claim Moses as one of their prophets too. A lot of the figures, and Abraham, a lot of the figures that occur in the Bible are claimed by Islam as prophets of Islam as well. So, way down at Deuteronomy. At this point, the children of Israel, the Jews, are ready to go into the promised land. They're just on the borders waiting. And the person who takes them there is Joshua. Joshua had been a servant of Moses, and when Moses dies, he takes over from Moses and actually leads the people into the promised land. Now, Palestine at the time was occupied by a variety of different tribes and peoples, and the book of Joshua is really about the conquest of those people. So the Jews coming into what they regarded as their homeland and taking over. So that's the book of Joshua.
For the people that got there after.
Yeah.
That were there after. Yes.
Before them.
After
Well, after and before. Because Abraham was sent to go and live, and Isaac sent to go and live in that region of the world. And according to the Jews, Abraham and Isaac were given that plot of land, that area of land. So, God. So then when they spent all their 100 years or so, a couple of 100 years in Egypt, then of course it was taken up by our people. So they then come in, taken over again. By force. Yes. Joshua is a bloody book.
Yeah.
There are a lot of battles in Joshua. It's fighting all the way. Then you have books like Judges and Ruth, which are the early history of the people now settled in this property. And the history continues through the books 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1st and 2nd King, and also it's duplicated in Chronicles. So if you look at the way they've set this out, they've got 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, all in a row, which takes you to the fall of Jerusalem. Now, so those 4 books tell all of that story. Chronicles tells it all over again. Exactly the same story. It's just like it's been written by a different group of people, but it's the same stuff. Right? So what happened with this nation, this young nation in this plot of land? They had a time where they were not ruled by kings, they were ruled by what were known as judges. And the judges were people who, generally the people just lived on the land and did their own thing. There were no rules around it. But occasionally a group, a foreign group would come in and try and invade or cause some trouble. And the judges were often military leaders who were raised up to defend the people against these tribes coming in. At some point in their history, the people got together and decided, well, all of these other nations around about us have got kings. We'd really like a king, because a king is going to unify us all together. He's going to raise an army and defend us, set up a currency, have a legal system, all this sort of stuff that a king does, set up a government. And so they asked for a king. Now, they asked the prophet Samuel. And Samuel has these books named after him. Samuel is not well pleased by this, but nevertheless, he's commanded to go and find a king. And the first three kings are Saul and David and Solomon. Now, under those three kings, Saul kind of went bad a bit, and so he's replaced then by David. And David has a son called Solomon.
Did David write the Psalms?
David wrote some of the Psalms, yes. Yep. The Psalms is that book right bang in the middle. Okay, and they are songs actually.
It's the 23rd Psalm. Should probably look at them.
Yes, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Tattooed on her foot.
Yeah, she is the Lord is my shepherd.
There you go.
Right, well, that's Psalms.
So that's Psalm 23. Very well known psalm, but they're songs.
It's a really nice one. A lot of people are comforted by that psalm. A lot of people use it as a reading at their funeral as well. Don't worry about me because I'm sort of cool, in a cool place, sort of thing. Yeah, it's really nice. My grandmother.
Now, after Solomon died, what happened was his son wanted to raise taxes.
Whose son?
Solomon's son wanted to raise taxes.
Mm.
He was advised against it, but raised taxes anyway.
By the older, he was advised by the older guys.
Yeah, the elders.
Don't do it. But then he listened to his friends who said, you reckon my father's whatever, like rod was hard. Well, mine's going to be even harder.
Yeah.
So he decided to listen to the young dudes and
He came down heavy.
got busted.
As a result, what happened was the nation of Israel split into two parts. The southern kingdom, which became known as Judah, and the northern kingdom, which became known as Israel. So you've got Israel in the north, Judah in the south. Now, this is why we call the Jews, because the Jews are the descendants of Judah. See? Whereas previously they'd just all been known as Israelites. So the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah. And the northern kingdom decided, right, well, we're going to go off and we're going to elect our own king and we're not going to pay any of those proxy taxes. Okay, so that's what they did. They had their own king, and then the southern king continued the smaller kingdom that he had, so he couldn't spend his money on quite so many parties as I think he planned. So then you have a story of these two kingdoms which occasionally fight each other, but then they're also invaded by other more powerful nations than them. So you've got the Egyptians in the south, Egypt's quite a large country, it's quite a powerful country, a technologically advanced country, so they were always a threat. And then in the north, you had the Assyrians, first of all. It was a growing empire, and they invaded the countries of Israel and Judah. Eventually, they managed to completely subdue and capture Israel, the northern kingdom, and carried most of the people off. And then they had a go at Judah. They tried to invade Judah as well, and they caused a bit of trouble, but they were eventually driven back.
Wasn't Judah the smaller of the two?
It was the smaller of the two, yes, but it survived the onslaught. And there's quite an interesting tale in the second book of Kings where overnight, the Assyrians it's like they woke up in confusion and they started attacking each other. And there was various plagues and things happened as well. And so they were overcome by sickness and all sorts of stuff, which eventually just drove the army back.
So they built the fighting having stuff for land, like
Oh, yeah, land ownership, then they can
Taxes as well.
taxes. They can
Yeah.
then have more
Yeah.
money.
So then the Assyrians got beaten back, and then the next powerful empire to come in was Babylon. Okay, so Babylon conquered the Assyrian Empire. Because of that, they'd already conquered Israel, and then they had to go at Judah, and they did actually conquer Judah. And Judah was then a lot of the ruling classes in Judah were taken to the city of Babylon, and they left really only the poor, the uninfluential people in the land of Judah itself. They put a puppet king on the throne, and and then they just were drawing taxes from the people that were there. And then really the Old Testament ends. The people of Israel, the Jews, do come back to the land eventually. And some of the books, and especially some of the prophetic books, do talk about the Jews coming back to the land. If you look at the last one here on this list, Nehemiah, there's the rebuilding and the return to Jerusalem. But
Are there any outside historical confirmations of this?
a lot of things there are. So, for example, the Assyrians, there is record in the Assyrian archaeological finds of the defeat of the Assyrian army in Judah.
That's interesting.
There's
I
things
think
so
one
there-
thing that's also interesting on all this, and it's a bit out of place in the New Testament yet, but you mentioned at church once how there are independent people who they're outside the Bible verifying Jesus.
Yes.
And it was interesting. I was walking downtown not long ago, and two young men are talking, and like as if it's all just made up. What if how do we even know Jesus existed? So we can look at what does it mean, but it was interesting to hear that. It was some person from the Romans or something, somebody who didn't like Jesus but had written independently about him. Right?
There are lots of different sources. When you're talking about Jesus, for example, one of the major sources is a chap called Josephus. Josephus was a Jewish historian writing after Jesus' time, and he refers in a couple of places to this person, Jesus. He's one of the most detailed external sources about knowledge about Jesus. And then, yes, you have other Roman figures who write about Jesus existing.
What is the name Jesus?
It is just his name. What it is it's actually the Greek form of the name Joshua. Okay. Now we've got a Joshua here in the Old Testament. Okay. And it's a Hebrew name. So Jesus is simply the Greek form of that. It means Yah, God, saves. Okay. But that's all it is, it's a name. Yeah. Let's get on to that bit of the Bible. So we've got to the end of here. The Jews have come back to the land in a much weakened state than they were. They've managed to rebuild Jerusalem. They're trying to rebuild the temple as well, which was the center, the religious center for them. Then we go across to the New Testament, so this next page. Now this covers a much shorter period of history. If you look at the numbers down this big column, it starts BC or AD with Jesus' birth, and it goes down to approximately 100. Okay, so we're only talking about 100 years, whereas over on this page we were talking about a couple of thousand years.
I'm going to turn on my phone. Sorry, we might have to get
That's fine. So the New Testament begins with Jesus' birth. Okay, Jesus Christ, as he became known, then became the inspiration for the Christian church. This is where we get the word Christian. It comes from the word Christ, which was one of the titles given to Jesus. Jesus is understood by the Christian church to be God incarnate. So he's God come to earth. Okay, that's why he's so important. And the first 4 books of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, tell his story from his birth through to his crucifixion.
Doesn't he get, like, what's it called when he comes back to life?
Resurrected, yes. And so Matthew, possibly Mark, Luke, and certainly John do all have stories of Jesus' resurrection, appearances to the disciples. An important thing to note is, although there's a lot of blank space in there, okay, so it says Jesus' birth, then down the bottom there's Jesus' baptism and Jesus' crucifixion. Jesus' ministry and his work took place really over 3 years. And so the Gospels really only tell the story of Jesus' last 3 years of life, from age 30 to 33, approximately.
What about before that? Is there a story?
There are a few stories. There's stories about Jesus' birth, and there is one story of when he was 12 years old, when he was taken to the temple by his parents. And then the story picks up again in with Jesus' baptism, and then he begins his ministry.
I
his
thought the
teaching
Catholic Bible
ministry.
had a few more stories.
Now, there are other stories around about Jesus in between.
So what's Catholicism? Like Christianity, Catholicism?
Well,
So
Catholicism is a
Catholicism
branch
of
of Christianity. Okay,
They use a different Bible than we do.
They've got a few more books, don't they?
they do have a few. Now, Brad, you were talking about dividing your Bible up and coming somewhere different because you had what? You remember? Is he even there?
No, I don't think so.
Might have
It
disappeared.
was the Apocrypha.
Maybe you sent me a message. Oh, sorry, my internet has gone down. 5 minutes ago. Okay. So I don't know if you remember, but Brad said he divided his Bible up a bit differently because he had a thing called the Apocrypha. Now, the Apocrypha is a little section of books that often appears at the end of the Old Testament, so in the end of the first 3 quarters, okay? And that is additional books the Catholic Church believe are part of the Bible. Okay.
But what wasn't the early church, not the earliest church, but for 1,000 years, like before the Reformation? It was the Catholic Church.
No, it was the
No,
Orthodox
it wasn't.
Church.
It was
Oh,
the
okay.
Orthodox
Yeah.
Church.
Oh, okay.
We do tend to think of the Catholics as the
I used to
original,
think that
but
too.
they weren't.
What time did
The
they come around?
Orthodox were. Look, basically what you've got is, you think about Rome as being the centre of the Catholic Church, isn't it? You know, the Vatican is in Rome, their headquarters. So really the Catholic Church is kind of the Western Christian church. Okay? And the Orthodox Church is kind of the Eastern Christian church.
Mediterranean.
Well, it's Greek. You know, you've got the Greek, you've got the Russian Orthodox, you've got Serbian Orthodox. So they're really the eastern side. So they were originally one church, but at some point there's been a split. Now I don't know the history of the split between the two.
But did the Orthodox use this Bible?
They
Now
have a
the
different Easter.
Orthodox,
Oh, I suppose it's
see, the
calendars.
Orthodox have other books in there as well. So the Catholics have additional books, but the Orthodox have additional books to what the Catholics have.
Since the Protestant churches came along, they
I've got this. This is a Protestant Bible. Every one of us have got a Protestant Bible.
But the core stories, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are in them all, and then some have just got some other material. But I think
So here's the thing: there's the what was it called? The Apocrypha that I was talking
Apocalypse.
about are all Old Testament books. They're extra to the
Oh,
Old
the
Testament.
old,
They're not
okay.
extra to the New. Okay. Now, having said that, there are other books that vie for a position in the New Testament. Okay. But somehow the church has said, well, this book is in the New Testament, this book isn't.
The Dead Sea Scrolls.
that's another whole-
That's they're like there's got copies of the book of Isaiah and things. They're Jewish, yeah.
So the church just, pardon?
Sorry.
The church just decides which is included in.
So yeah, the church has gone through the process of, in the first 100 years or so, or 100, 200, 300 years, after Jesus was crucified and resurrected, all of these books about Jesus started appearing. People were writing books left, right, and centre. Okay, what the church has tried to do is look at all of these and say, well, which of these ones are actually reliable? Which of these books can we actually take as gospel truth? Okay. One of the ways they've done that is they've really picked on the early books and they've tried to pick on particular authors. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they are all people who were associated with that early church. Therefore, the thinking was their writing is likely to be reliable.
Especially since they're all very similar.
Yeah, and they're also looking for corroboration, not just the book itself, but corroboration from other sources that these books are genuine. So the church is pretty sure that these 4 books are pretty likely to be reliable because they're early. There's enough people early enough testifying to the existence of these books. One of the problems is some people would write a book and claim that it was by one of the apostles. So, for example, there's a thing called the Gospel of Thomas. Now, Thomas was one of the disciples. Right? So the claim the book makes is that this gospel was written by one of the disciples, therefore it ought to be included in the New Testament. But then the church has looked at it at this time, and they did it around sort of 300 AD. The church has looked at it and decided, no, it's not reliable enough. Now, the Gospel of Thomas, I believe, has a number of stories about Jesus' childhood, right, and miraculous things that Jesus did as a child. Okay. So there are stories around what Jesus did as a child, but they're not credited generally by the church as being reliable. Okay.
So it's saying someone could just make them up.
Yeah.
If they wanted to.
Yeah, that's right. Now, it's worth saying the book of Revelation, the very last book in the Bible, is somewhat controversial
That's true.
Okay. As to whether it should be in the Bible or not. So Martin Luther, I don't know whether you know the name Martin Luther.
And then Martin Luther King, but
Martin Luther King's named after Martin Luther.
yeah,
Martin Luther was a great reformer. He was the person, he was a Catholic priest, but he was the person who basically began what's known as Protestantism. So the Protestant church came out of Martin Luther's protests against. So he did this thing where he had a certain number of articles and he hammered them on his church door because he thought they were so important for the thing. He really wanted the church, the Catholic Church, to answer these issues. And then from that sprang the Protestant church. Martin Luther thought the book of Revelation did not belong in the Bible.
so the Protestant Bible wouldn't have the book of Revelation.
It does. It does
Sounds,
actually.
yeah.
Yes, it does. For whatever reason, we decided that Martin Luther was actually wrong. Okay, and it should be. So it is. But he thought the book of Revelation didn't belong in the
My
Bible.
suggestion is not to dive into it too soon. Enjoy Matthew or something. It's very difficult.
It's pretty strange. It's pretty
Not
strange.
dive into the book of Revelation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just give them this for a
Yeah.
while.
So look, in terms of the story of the Bible, what was that?
I didn't say anything.
You've got the story of Jesus, okay, his crucifixion and resurrection, the book of Acts, which tells the story of the beginning of the church after Jesus is crucified, what the disciples do and the followers that they gather and create the church. And then you have all of these letters, which are written to all these different groups that the disciples, particularly Paul, has built up in that area of the world. And then right at the end, they have the book of Revelation. The church was persecuted quite severely. Nero, the Christian church, yeah. Nero was the first of the emperors to do this. Nero was famous for burning Rome. He's thought to have burnt Rome and played the fiddle while it burnt.
He was a bit crazy.
He was thought to be really crazy, but he blamed the Christians. Oh, I didn't burn Rome, the Christians did it, you see. So he then starts killing Christians.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Let
It's like
himself off the
9/11 sort of thing. Let's
Yeah.
create something. Yeah, that's great.
So he was the first emperor to have a go at the Christian church. He didn't wipe them out, obviously.
So wait, Romans are a part of a church. Romans? No.
So
Okay.
Rome is a city
Yeah.
which has a lot of different temples in it, right? To a lot of different idols. I mean, people in those days worshipped idols.
Idols.
Like a statue. They'd set up a statue and say, this is my God, and give it,
Okay.
give it offerings and worship and pray to it and all sorts of stuff. So
So-
Rome, as with most of the cities in the world at the time, had all of these different temples to all of these different gods.
Okay, so it's separate from Christianity.
Christianity just comes along and is another religion along with all of these others that are around. So it just happens to be one that's gaining a lot of momentum, you see. And so
Could take power away if you're following that and not me as Nero threatening.
yeah, that's right. So they became a bit of a target. Now, so Nero wasn't the only one. The next emperor to have a go at the Christians was called Domitian. Okay, and Domitian, his tactic wasn't so much just go in and kill them all. It was more take the leaders away. Okay, take the leaders away, and then go in and kill a few of the plebs, and the plebs will just disappear and go back to idol
Clever,
worship.
I bet it worked pretty well.
Okay. Now, what he did was,
I'm saying I bet that would work pretty well.
well, what happened was he took the Apostle John, who was one of those leaders at the time, and he put him on an island called Patmos. So he was exiled, taken him from his churches that he was leading and put them somewhere in the middle of the
That's
So
a
sea.
very
disciple
early
was a
church.
student and an apostle was a teacher.
Yes.
Okay.
And
So the
John,
apostles come after the disciples?
so John, being a disciple, became an apostle.
Oh,
So having been a student, he became a teacher.
okay.
Yeah. And
Because he'd spent many
Jesus.
years with Jesus.
yes, that's right. That's right. So he became a very influential leader, and then so Domitian takes John, pops him on Patmos, and then starts going around and killing a few of the Christians that are left to try and disperse the churches. What John does is he starts writing letters to the churches to try and encourage them to stick together despite the persecution. And he writes this book called Revelation as a way of encouraging these churches to stick together. And what Revelation is really is it's almost like a book of fantasy. It looks like a work of fantasy, like modern fantasy literature.
Fiction.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. Some people take it as being prophecy that John had seen the end of the world, and this is how the end of the world is going to play out. That's what some
That's
people
what
believe
most
about Revelation.
fundamentalist Christians think, sure.
Fundamentalists, yes. Yeah, that's right.
And most of the rest of Christians just ignore it.
Uncomfortably so, yes, sometimes.
So what is it? Can you give a summary? What does it say?
But Swedenborg had a fair bit to say about it.
Yeah, he talks about it a great deal in terms of spiritual trials and temptations. But there's lots of things, like there's dragons and there's the beast from the sea
And really bizarre beasts with like
7 heads. And
yeah,
10
and horns on
and,
each head,
you know,
and wheels. Like the way they move, they've got wheels, and the wheels go in all directions, and it's like really whoa, yeah.
So it's fantastic imagery.
Yeah.
It really is quite
Yeah.
amazing stuff, and it would make a fabulous fantasy movie. Okay.
If you could
Yeah.
pick, if you could actually draw what he's
Yeah.
picturing,
Yeah.
you'd be like, I
Um,
can't see how this works.
But what he's doing is he's writing this stuff to his churches to say, just hold on, you know, the stuff you're going through might look bad, but there's an end to it. Really.
So
There's a purpose behind it all.
some people think that it was, what's his name, so long ago,
Swedenborg.
Swedenborg, just was he thinking that it might have been like a metaphor or something?
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, but it's a metaphor for our spiritual development. It's fine. Not everybody will accept that, but that's the way Swedenborg pretty much talks about it. So look, that's a potted in however long that took. History of, that's the story of the Bible. That's what's in the Bible. Okay. So if you need, you know, if you're looking at a book and you think, where does it fit? Then have a look at these 2 charts, because they really are quite good in terms of Bible storyline.
Can I give you a reminder again? So the other books, the general letters, are by James, Peter. Are those apostles? Are those disciples?
So James is reckoned to be the brother of Jesus, or half brother technically.
Oh,
And Peter?
Peter is the apostle Peter. He was the leader of the apostles, the leader of the disciples. And he became, when Jesus was crucified and after his resurrection, Peter really became the leader, because he'd been recognized by Jesus really as being the leader.
And then how many years did he have before he was killed?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure.
And James was killed as well.
Yes, we think James was killed. Okay.
And who's Hebrews?
We don't know who
That
wrote
was the one we
Hebrews.
didn't know. That's one of all the jokes there about, you know, that men should make their wives coffee because it says in the Bible, Hebrews. You've not heard that one before.
Jude is one of the disciples. That's called. His name is actually Judas, but he's not called Judas because Judas Iscariot, who was one of the disciples, was responsible for betraying Jesus, which led to his execution. You see, but there was another disciple called Judas. They shortened his name to Jude so as not to confuse him with Judas Iscariot.
And John, is that the apostle?
John is the apostle, the disciple John.
And does he write very differently from in these books to the Revelation?
There has been all manner of study of the Gospel of John, the 3 letters of John, and the book of Revelation to see whether indeed the 5 books were in fact written by the same person.
What is your
Now,
take on it?
Oh, look, I don't know enough about Greek to be able, like Greek syntax, to be able to go and say.
No, but you got people you respect, perhaps, that have an opinion on it.
I think what is likely is that the 3 epistles of John and Revelation were probably written by the Apostle John. The Gospel of John was probably written by a scribe listening to John, the old man, recount the stories of Jesus. That's what I think probably took place.
But I'm just wondering, you know, he's obviously had a lot of duress being in jail. It's just, there is a lot. What are some of the things that come out of, like there's some things here. What I'd like to suggest here, tell me if you've got it, take it. And Swedenborg corroborates with this, there's certain parts of the Bible that are seen as divinely inspired, right?
Yes.
There's certain other parts, such as what Paul writes, which he does not see as divinely inspired. It's by somebody who's a very devoted Christian writing, but somehow not divinely inspired. Now, to understand that and take that in, I hope at some point, you know, we have a little bit of background. In fact, you're reading it in that your book, aren't you, about what the credibility, a little bit of the credibility behind in Swedenborg is. But so what I think is difficult for a lot of the world to do, that don't develop a real love and connection of the teachings of Jesus himself, is that some of this extraneous stuff is there to help us understand it, but it may not be the word of God. You see what I'm saying? And then some fundamentals say everything in the Bible must have meaning and it's the word of God. So some people spend a lot of time like the end is going to come and here's how it's all going to look, and we're all just going to, if we believe, we're going to go up, and if we don't believe, we're going to be just burned or something. You see what I mean? Which comes in Revelations. Get it? To me, that's like a man who's in jail who's writing and just like, you know, keep it up and I'll tell you a good story so that you keep it up. But Swedenborg, and I haven't studied that enough, has a search, you know, has a link for it. But it's still, there is some stuff that is in these extraneous parts of the Bible that really cause if you give it too much credence, can cause very easy to poke fun of the whole thing.
Here's another theory about Revelation. I think it's credible. If you're in prison, okay, and you're writing letters to someone outside,
Oh yeah,
right? Who's going to read that letter
first,
first?
the jailer.
The jailer, right? So if you're going to say anything that the jailer does not want someone else to read, you have to say it in code, don't you? See? And so one of the theories about Revelation is all of this fantastic imagery is really code. Okay? Yeah, that's right. An intentional metaphor that John has created or knows that his readers, his intended readers, will understand, but the jailer will not. So that's one of the theories about the book of Revelation, and it's got some credibility. Okay. So this is how this imagery has originated. John is writing in code. Now then you take that, and yes, it's a metaphor, a very direct metaphor in one way, but then it's also taken by Swedenborg, and certainly not the only one, to take it as a metaphor in another way as well.
As a spiritual journey.
As a spiritual journey. Now, in terms of picking the books out of the Bible, I'm actually going to, one of our sessions, I've got a chart for you to show you how different churches select, or which books they've selected from the Bible. It's very easy, you know, you go to a bookstore, a normal bookstore, there's probably a Bible on the shelf, and you probably get a Bible like this. It's probably the only kind of Bible you can buy in, say, Angus and Robertson or ABC Books, if they have a Bible on the shelf. One like this, Protestant Bible. So it's very easy to buy the Bible and think, oh, well, that's it. But that's the Bible, and there's nothing more to it. But that's not the case. There's the Apocrypha that Brad talked about. There's a collection of books called the Pseudepigrapha, okay, which are spiritual books, okay, in this same tradition. But for whatever reason, the church decided, no, they're not credible books. But there they are, they're still spiritual books that someone's written, and they vie for attention. So there's a lot of those sorts of books around, and it's, you know, Swedenborg gets hauled over the coals because he's selective in one way of which books are divinely inspired. But it's not as simple as saying this is the Bible, is the Bible, is the Bible.
Right.
It's just not.
And he must have known that.
Yes, he knew that. Swedenborg comes at it a different way, and we'll explore that when I show you those different selections of books that the different churches make. But he doesn't come at it the way the traditional Christian
So
church
now we
has
can
done,
start on
which
our
is by-
stories tonight. All the stories that we will want to talk about.
It is 9 o'clock, isn't it? Look, what I will do,
Inviting some opposition.
I'm just going to show you that page and this one. I've just done a little study of the concept of hell. Okay. Now, what I've got on the first page are, you'll notice the book Matthew is the reference. So I've got Matthew 5:22, for example, as the first reference. So to find that, you would go and find the book of Matthew. Let's do it, just so you can, which was about 3/4 of the way through. And you'll find in your Bibles that there are large numbers on some of the pages. Now you want to go to, they are chapters, you want chapter 5. So you go and find chapter 5 in Matthew. There we go, I found my chapter 5 in Matthew. And then the next number is 22. You will find that there are numbers, smaller numbers down the side. And if you find the little 22, that is verse 22, and mine is up here. And that is what I have quoted.
But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother, is that what it is?
Yes, that's it. I will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka, is a fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Okay. Now, the word hell is actually the Greek word Gehenna. Okay. And so what I've done, I've given you a couple of different references to Gehenna, the first section, and then I've got what I've called the Strong's number. If you remember, I showed the concordance last time. So Strong's number, the Greek word number 1067 is Gehenna, and it says it's of Hebrew origin and describes how it's translated. The next one, Strong's number 02011, is Hinnom, which is that is the Hebrew word that Gehenna comes from. It's the valley of Ben Hinnom, the sons of Hinnom, and then there's a bit of extra, a few other quotes about the valley of Ben Hinnom at the bottom of the page. Then over the page is a nice little article from one of these encyclopedias of the Bible about the origin of hell, the everlasting bonfire. In summary, Gehenna, the valley of Ben Hinnom, was Jerusalem's rubbish tip. Okay, it's Jerusalem's rubbish tip. The reason it was a rubbish tip was because it had been used for human sacrifice. And in order to prevent it from continuing to be used as for human sacrifice,
By who?
sorry,
Who was sacrificing humans?
some of the children of Israel, they got misled into following other gods, and some of these other gods, and the rituals of the peoples around about them decreed human sacrifice. Okay. So they offer their children as a sacrifice. So to prevent that happening, they turned the place into a rubbish tip.
That's an interesting thing to do.
Okay. So it smelled. And not only did they do that, they would burn their rubbish, because rubbish mounts up. You've got a city, is a fair number of people producing a lot of rubbish. Probably not as much rubbish as we produce these days, but so they would burn some of it. So that's where the fires of hell come from. That's the image of the fires of hell. It's the valley of Ben Hinnom. And all of the associated stuff of child sacrifice and misery and all that sort of stuff is all associated with around that one place, very, very near to the city of Jerusalem.
So who came up with the idea that when you die, it was an actual thing?
It was an actual place, and it became
A metaphor.
well, it was a metaphor. Yeah. So if you're going to be a bad boy, then your suffering will be somewhat like being in the valley of Ben Hinnom. See?
And I hope you've managed to hang out with us. I don't know if we can cover some of that with Swedenborg, right? I hope we get to that, because Swedenborg has an idea of what hell is, which is not like, well, you're going to go to a place that's going to torture you, but it's a place that it's going to very much more, what you call sophisticated
You end up choosing it for yourself.
Yeah,
pretty much.
you choose
So
it.
you can choose it livingly, like, you know, living in like,
Well, it's who you are. It's the decisions you make, and it's who you are and who you become, and that's where you go. And that's where you feel best to be. But it's a form of hell because, you know, if you're going off with a bunch of con men, you've got to con each other. I mean, have you ever been con, Joe? I sure have. You know, they need people who want to trust them. Well, if you're a con man, it's be hell, wouldn't it? Because you can't actually get away with it. You see the logic there? It's very simplistic right now, but hopefully we'll cover that at some point.
You're quite right about living in it, livingly.
that's what when you die.
Yeah, it's not necessarily when you die. That's quite right.
It's like heaven is a place on earth.
Yeah,
Hell
it's a
is place
state of
on
mind.
earth.
It's a state of mind.
And that can change from moment to moment.
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it needn't be a permanent place. That's something worth remembering too. We can all go through hell in one way or another for a variety of reasons. Needn't be a permanent place, but it can be too.
That's a complicated one as well.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Well, it's hard because, you know, people
You don't know
suicide.
where that person
What's
was
their
at
state of
spiritually.
mind?
well,
Yeah.
the Catholics have a very clear statement, which you might
Yeah.
be picking up on, which is
Yeah.
if you commit suicide, all the game's
That's it.
off. But I
Yeah,
mean,
Yeah.
All the games off as
well,
in.
the game's off, you're not going to heaven
Yeah.
because they just decided it. But I don't think Swedenborg said it.
I don't know. I don't recall anything that Swedenborg's written about suicide.
I don't think the Bible says it, does it?
No, I don't recall anything about
I mean, if you
that.
go to somebody who's just lived a really good life and is a good person, but is beaten up and struck with this, and life happens, and all your family dies around you, and then it's wartime, and it's this, and just mind just goes crazy and says, "I can't stand it," and they're in a non-sound mind and they kill themselves. I cannot see that person going to hell because it's just beyond them. It's not like a thing. And that gets back to the concept which I really like from Swedenborg, which is you're creating this. You've created this great person, and through no fault of their own, they haven't designed all this stuff, but it's just totally all on them. And I mean, as you go through life, I think you'll see some people, really good people, and just suddenly some sort of mental illness takes over.
Swedenborg does say that he does talk about people being in states of compulsion. He talks about that we're not, you know, when you're in a state of compulsion, you're not responsible for your actions. And he does talk about instability of mind.
Interesting. That's what I was just saying, isn't it?
That could be what depression is, kind of.
Yeah, so
Depression, profound anxiety, panic attacks and life. But we need to
we
speak to
do. Let me see if I can stop this. And